What if I told you that the secret to a 40-year, completely unbreakable daily habit involves intentionally crushing the soles of your feet with a sharp plastic stick?
Yeah, until you basically cry tears of intense, agonizing pain.
Sure.
I mean, it sounds less like a self-improvement strategy and more like, I don't know, a medieval interrogation
Right.
technique.
It sounds horrible.
Yeah.
But that is the actual documented starting point for one of the most remarkably consistent individuals we have ever studied on this show.
It really is. And, we usually think about building a new habit, whether that's studying a language or picking up a sport, as this pristine, highly optimized routine.
Oh, totally. You buy the perfect planner.
Right.
You set an alarm for 5 a.m. and you expect to just power through on pure willpower.
Exactly. And when that fails, which, let's be honest, it almost always does, we just end up hating ourselves.
Yeah, we assume we are fundamentally broken or lazy or whatever.
Right, but the willpower myth is just incredibly pervasive. We treat cognitive discipline like this infinite battery, completely ignoring the neurological reality that willpower is a highly limited resource.
It's designed for acute emergencies,
Yeah.
right? Not for the daily grind of learning irregular verbs or
That's
jogging in the freezing cold.
Exactly. Which brings us perfectly to the entire reason we are doing this specific custom deep dive today.
Yes, we are talking directly to you, our listener. You reached out to us, you're a high school student,
Yeah.
and you were incredibly honest about something a lot of people struggle with, but, they hide it.
Yeah, you mentioned dealing with a pretty heavy dose of self-loathing.
You try to start studying English, you try to pick up new hobbies, and when you inevitably fall off the wagon, the guilt just sort of spirals. You feel like you just can't stick to anything.
But nestled inside that very candid confession was this absolutely fantastic observation.
I loved it.
Yeah, you looked at the author of the personal essays we're dissecting today. A man who mastered English to the point of negotiating international contracts, maintained a daily health routine for 4 decades, and recently took up running in his mid-60s.
And you noted, I think your exact words were, I might not be as good at English as this guy, but I could definitely beat him at running.
Haha, yes. That competitive spark is just brilliant.
It really is. And let me assure you right now, you can absolutely beat his running records. Without a doubt.
Oh, totally. But the mission today is much bigger than a foot race.
Right. We have a massive stack of this author's deeply personal essays chronicling decades of his life. We're talking his physical ailments, his romantic motivations, his teaching philosophy.
It's a goldmine, and we are going to extract the exact underlying psychological mechanics of his consistency.
We are basically going to weaponize these blind spots in human psychology so you can build an unbreakable English habit, completely dismantle that self-loathing, and yes, thoroughly destroy a 60-something man's jogging times.
I love that. And I think the overarching theme in these essays is just a total rejection of brute force discipline.
Which is such a relief, honestly.
Right. This author didn't succeed through sheer grit. He succeeded by fundamentally hacking his own psychological environment.
Yeah, he shifted the moments where decisions are made. He blurred the boundaries between grueling work and genuine play.
And most importantly, he developed a really profound framework for forgiving himself when the system inevitably breaks down.
Because it will break down.
Yeah.
So let's start by looking at the tape on this running habit of his, because I want you, the listener, to understand exactly who you are competing against here.
Yeah, let's look at the stats.
How does a man in his 60s, who explicitly notes in his writing that he hadn't run for more than 3 consecutive minutes in 40 years, suddenly forge a rock-solid exercise routine?
Well, the environment he started in makes it even more improbable, honestly. He began this routine in January.
Oh, wow. So peak winter.
Right. We are talking about 7 o'clock in the morning, dead of winter, freezing cold temperatures.
That sounds absolutely miserable.
It is. And if you look at the behavioral science of habit formation, this is a scenario that is perfectly designed for failure. I mean, the friction to start is astronomically high.
So how did he actually do it?
His initial framing is what saved him. His goal wasn't actually to, become a runner.
What was it then?
He simply wanted to step outside to get some morning sun, purely to reset his circadian rhythm for his general health.
Wait, so the bar for success was literally just opening the front door and standing there?
Literally just standing there in the freezing cold. And naturally, because the temperature was so low, standing still became physically uncomfortable.
Sure, you trees.
Right, so his body's biological imperative just took over. He unconsciously started jogging just to generate body heat.
Oh, that is so smart. He tricked his physiological system into initiating the exercise.
Exactly. And the routine he eventually settled into is going to give you, our listener, a lot of confidence. He runs merely 4 to 5 times a week, and the duration of each run is strictly between 5 and 9 minutes.
5 to 9 minutes? See, you can walk out your front door right now and beat a 5-minute jog.
Oh, easily. But the crazy thing is the physiological payoff he got from this microscopic habit.
Right, because he actually saw real results from just a few minutes a day.
Huge results. He documents his weight dropping from the 66 kilogram range down to the 63 kilogram range in just a matter of months.
That's significant for such a short duration of exercise.
And even more impressively, he notes a significant improvement in his proprioception and core stability. He specifically measures this by his newfound ability to put on his socks while standing entirely on one leg without wobbling.
The sock metric. I love that. That is such a relatable, real-world way to measure your fitness.
It actually is a brilliant functional test of kinetic chain health in older adults. But the physical results, while impressive, are really a byproduct of the real genius here.
Which is the mental framework, right?
Yes. The mental framework he uses to maintain this habit without relying on his prefrontal cortex to make a disciplined choice every morning. He employs the ultimate consistency hack, which is the deliberate shifting of the decision point.
Let's break that down, because usually the hardest part of any habit is the moment you wake up. The alarm goes off, it's dark, it's cold, and your brain immediately asks, should I do this today?
Right, and the answer your tired brain gives is almost always going to be a resounding no.
Exactly. I'm staying in bed.
Well, the author recognized that morning cognitive vulnerability. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning and resisting immediate gratification, is essentially offline when you first wake up.
It's still sleep.
Pretty much. If you ask it to make a difficult choice between a warm bed and the freezing pavement, the primitive, comfort-seeking parts of the brain will win every single time.
So how does he bypass that?
He completely removes the should I run question from his morning routine. He bypasses the decision entirely. The clothes go on, the shoes go on, the door opens.
It's automated.
Completely automated up to the point of movement. The decision to start is eliminated.
Okay, but he still has to decide how far to run, right? When does that happen?
The actual decision of his workout doesn't occur until he is 2 or 3 minutes into the jog.
Oh, wow. So he's already deep into it.
Exactly. He waits until his heart rate is elevated, blood is flowing, and dopamine is starting to release. And right at the moment when the run starts to feel physically taxing, he reaches a specific intersection in his neighborhood.
Okay.
That geographical point is where he places the burden of choice. He must decide at that exact intersection. Do I turn left for the short 6-minute route, or do I turn right for the slightly longer 8.5-minute route?
That is brilliant, because by the time he's evaluating the effort, he is already in motion. The massive friction of overcoming inertia is completely in the rearview mirror.
Right.
But I have to ask about the mechanics of this longer route. He writes extensively about this specific turnaround pole on the 8.5-minute path.
Oh yes, the turnaround pole.
He notes that choosing to go to the furthest pole feels incredibly daunting. Tricking your brain to turn right is one thing, but dealing with the mid-run fatigue of pushing further seems like it would eventually just, erode your motivation.
What you're pointing to is a fascinating cognitive distortion, and the author dissects it beautifully in the essays. At the far end of his longer route, he faces a micro decision. He can turn around at a closer utility pole, or he can push on to the absolute furthest pole before heading back.
Okay, so how far apart are these poles?
The actual measurable physical distance between those two poles is a mere 5 meters.
5 meters. That is literally a few strides. The caloric expenditure between those two options is virtually zero.
Physically negligible, but cognitively, choosing that furthest pole feels like an exhausting, monumental detour.
Really? Just 5 meters?
Yes. The author realized his brain was actively lying to him. It was wildly exaggerating the difficulty of the extra step. This connects to what psychologists call the goal gradient effect, but sort of operating in reverse.
How so?
When you are already expending effort, your brain perceives additional requirements, even minuscule ones, as disproportionately massive barriers. Recognizing that this feeling is a complete illusion is the key to pushing through it.
It's exactly like when you're writing an essay for a class. You realize you need to add just one more transition paragraph to make the argument flow.
Oh, absolutely.
The actual typing might take 3 minutes. It's a tiny amount of physical and mental work. But because you are already mentally fatigued, opening the document back up and writing those 4 sentences feels like rewriting the entire paper from scratch.
Yes. The brain creates a phantom mountain out of a molehill. That is a perfect analogy. The brain's threat detection system registers the extra effort as a danger to your energy reserves and amplifies the perceived difficulty to stop you.
So, how does our listener weaponize this psychological blind spot for her own goals, especially for her English studies?
Well, she must never wake up and decide, I'm going to study English for an hour today. Framing the goal that way is like staring at the furthest turnaround pole before you've even put your running shoes on.
Right, it's too much all at once.
The cognitive weight is too heavy. The brain will immediately initiate avoidance behaviors, like scrolling on a phone or suddenly deciding your room needs to be aggressively cleaned.
The classic procrastination trap. Oh, I definitely need to organize my sock drawer right now.
Exactly. So the application here is to surgically remove the decision from the start of the process. Her decision shouldn't be about studying at all. The only goal is, I'm going to sit at my desk, turn on the lamp, and open the textbook.
I love that. Shift the decision point past the initial friction. Once the book is open, the pen is in hand, and she has been reading for 5 minutes. Once the cognitive engine is actually running, then she can make the choice at the intersection.
Precisely. Do I study for 10 more minutes, or do I push for 20? And when she hits that moment where translating one more sentence feels like an unbearable mountain, she needs to recognize the 5-meter illusion.
The brain is lying.
The brain is lying. The extra sentence won't break her.
Bypassing friction gets you out the door on a Tuesday, and recognizing cognitive illusions keeps you running to the furthest pole. But let's look at the timeline. That machinery works for a week, maybe a month. But to maintain a habit for decades.
Yeah, bypassing friction isn't enough for that.
You need a massive internal engine. You need a long-term emotional anchor.
A structural hack will start a habit, sure, but only identity and deep emotion will sustain it. If we look at the author's running, his anchor wasn't a sterile medical metric like lowering my resting heart rate.
No one is going to run for 40 years for a resting heart rate.
Right. It was an incredibly vivid, deeply personal visualization. He imagines a specific date with his granddaughter, projecting 20 years into the future.
Oh, 20 years.
He wants to be an 80-year-old man walking briskly beside her, and his absolute driving desire is to hear her look at him and say, "You're so young, Grandpa."
It's essentially a cinematic scene playing in his head. He's not running to be healthy. He's running to become that specific character in that specific movie.
Exactly. And this exact same mechanism, tying the grueling daily work to a highly charged emotional avatar, is what fueled his mastery in English.
Now, this is the part I find fascinating. His drive to study in junior high and high school had absolutely nothing to do with wanting to be a good student or appeasing his teachers.
Nothing at all.
It was entirely fueled by an intense, consuming first love.
The narrative in his essays about this is just remarkable. He was receiving treatments at an orthopedic clinic for arthritis, and he became completely infatuated with a slightly older nurse who worked there.
He actually notes with some self-awareness that he has always had a weakness for older women.
Yeah, a trait he humorously suspects he inherited from his father. But this infatuation didn't just result in daydreaming. It became the nuclear reactor powering his academic trajectory.
Okay, so set the scene for us. He was doing well in his junior high English classes, but there was a massive, intimidating hurdle looming over him.
The Eichen Level 2 exam.
Right. And for context, that is a high school level certification. Sitting for that as a junior high student is a massive leap. And he is paralyzed by the fear of failure.
Completely paralyzed. He is hesitating to even submit the application because the potential rejection feels like an existential threat to his intelligence.
And he happens to be at the clinic talking to this nurse who he assumed viewed him as just a kid whining about middle school academic drama, and he consensus his paralyzing fear to her.
The nurse's response to him is a masterclass in reframing risk. She doesn't offer hollow platitudes. She doesn't say, "Oh, you're so smart, you'll definitely pass."
Right, she doesn't coddle him.
She simply looks at him and says, "If you want to pass, you have to take it. If you fail, you lose nothing."
If you fail, you lose nothing. The author describes hearing those words as a literal explosion of energy inside his chest.
He says the courage just welled up instantly.
He walked straight out of the clinic, went directly to the bookstore, and submitted his application. And he ended up passing the exam.
He even mentions the oral examiner being visibly shocked to see a junior high student sitting in the chair for the level 2 interview.
That's amazing.
But we need to analyze why the nurse's phrase was so neurologically explosive for him. She instantly transformed the exam from an identity threat into an asymmetric bet.
Explain what you mean by an asymmetric bet.
Before she spoke, failing meant he was fundamentally inadequate. She reframed it so that failing meant returning to the exact same status quo. He was already a junior high student without a level 2 certification. But passing meant elevation. The downside was zero, the upside was infinite.
But the real upside, the actual driving force, wasn't the certificate itself.
No, not at all.
It was about proving his worth to her. But, our listener hearing this might think, well, that's a great romantic movie plot, but I don't have a grand 20-year vision of being a vibrant grandfather, and I don't have a dramatic star-crossed romance with a medical professional to motivate my vocabulary flashcards.
And that's a totally fair point. But the underlying psychological principle doesn't require romance. It requires an identity shift.
Okay.
It's the difference between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits. The author didn't want to achieve the outcome of passing a test. He visualized a specific emotional avatar. He wanted to embody the identity of a capable, intellectual young man who was worthy of the sophisticated older woman's respect.
And for his running, his avatar is the vibrant, active patriarch.
Yes. So the listener cannot rely on a goal like, I want to improve my English grades by 10%. That is a sterile external metric.
Right. Your brain doesn't care about 10%.
The brain will not generate dopamine for a 10% grade increase when it's tired. She needs to construct her own emotional avatar. Who does she want to become through the vehicle of the English language?
I love that. So she needs to ask herself, am I learning this so I can be the person who travels alone to London or New York, navigating a foreign city with total untouchable confidence?
Exactly. Or, am I doing this so I can understand the raw, unfiltered interviews of my favorite international artists without waiting for someone else to translate the subtitles?
Yes. She needs to locate that deeply resonant future identity and attach it firmly to the daily habit of opening the textbook. The avatar is the engine.
The avatar is absolutely the engine.
So we have the engine, we've bypassed the initial friction, and we've got the emotional avatar driving us forward. But what does the actual machinery of learning look like?
This is where it gets really practical.
Because this author reached a 2EX score of 960. He operates in English at a high corporate level, negotiating complex contracts with overseas clients. Yet, reading through his essays, his foundational years were absolutely not built on painful, rigid rote memorization.
No, in fact, he explicitly states that he reached a point where he could no longer distinguish whether he was studying or playing.
Blurring the line between study and play is the hallmark of sustainable mastery.
If we trace his journey back to junior high, he initiated his learning with accessible broadcast materials, NHK radio programs like Zoku Kiso Aigo and Aigo Kaiwa. He was simultaneously utilizing training papers for two different foundational textbooks, New Prints and Everyday English.
Which, to be honest, sounds incredibly dry and academic on the surface.
It does, but the actual breakthrough, the catalyst that turned it from homework into an obsession came through music.
Yeah.
So specifically, he got his hands on the Beatles' Blue and Red compilation albums and records by the Carpenters. Now, these were imported vinyl records. They didn't come with helpful Japanese lyric sheets translated by the record company. The original English lyrics were just printed directly on the paper record sleeves.
And he didn't just put the record on and passively bob his head while doing math homework?
No, he obsessively, almost aggressively, practiced singing along. He specifically details his struggle with the Beatles song, Please Please Me. There is a rapid-fire lyric. I don't want to sound complaining, but you know there's always rain in my heart.
That's a fast line.
He practiced singing that single phrase over 100 times until he could match their speed perfectly.
Over 100 times. We really need to look at the neurological brilliance of what he was doing there. By singing at tempo, he was forcing his articulatory system, his mouth, his tongue, his vocal cords, to learn the prosody, the natural rhythm and stress timing of the English language.
Exactly. He was bypassing the analytical translating part of his brain and building pure physical muscle memory. And he didn't stop at mimicry. He used these pop songs for what linguists call pattern practice.
Right.
He would take a song like She Loves You and, while singing it, mentally alter the lyrics to He Loves You or They Love You.
Oh, that is so clever.
He was dynamically adjusting the verb conjugations in real time to practice grammatical rules within a musical framework.
He turned syntax into a rhythm game. That completely changes how the brain processes the information. It's not a chore anymore. It's a puzzle you're solving in real time.
But he also had to overcome a massive structural barrier that trips up almost every Japanese learner of English. Early on, his teacher told him a fundamental truth. English pronunciation cannot be accurately written using the Japanese katakana syllabary.
Which is a profound linguistic roadblock, right?
It's massive. Japanese katakana forces all foreign sounds into a more timed rhythm. A essentially consonant vowel pairs. English is stress-timed and contains entirely different phones. The author gives a brutal example of his early attempts to capture pronunciation before he understood this.
The mailman story.
Yes. He heard the English word mailman and transcribed it exactly as his untrained ear processed it, spelling it Meiduman in katakana.
Meiduman, which is a total cognitive dead end.
Yeah.
If you internalize Meiduman, a native speaker will never understand you, and you will never recognize the word when a native speaker says mailman. You are effectively learning a phantom language.
The author recognized this impassable block, but his revelation came when he discovered phonetic symbols, the International Phonetic Alphabet tucked in the back of a conversation book.
It's like finding a secret decoder ring.
That's exactly what it was for him.
Yeah.
He realized phonetic symbols were the actual map to the territory. By learning this new visual code, he could map his articulatory muscles to the exact sounds produced by the native speakers on his cassette tapes.
It bridged the gap between spelling and sound.
It made him feel, for the first time, like he was genuinely speaking English rather than just reciting Japanese approximations. The learning process transformed from a chore into a game of acoustic imitation and mastery.
Look, rewriting Beatles lyrics and decoding phonetic alphabets sounds incredibly effective. But I can hear our listener objecting right now.
Oh, for sure.
The author mentions in his essays that he used to write out English vocabulary words in the margins of old newspapers just for fun. Like he'd write out the months of the year, the seasons, the days of the week, filling the margins with up to 150 words just to soak in his own self-satisfaction.
Right.
Our high school listener is probably thinking, okay, I'm not naturally obsessed like that. I don't write vocabulary words for recreation. This guy's just wired differently. If I try to force myself to write vocabulary for fun, I'll be burned out by Tuesday.
And that is an entirely valid reaction. It sounds like an innate, unreachable obsession. But the author's essays provide a deep psychological context for why he approached learning with this joyful obsession.
And it wasn't genetic.
No, it was environmental. He contrasts two radically different educational environments provided by his parents: his father's teaching method and his mother's teaching method.
The section of the essays detailing his father's instruction is genuinely intense. It's hard to read.
It's a study in how to destroy a child's intrinsic motivation. His father took authoritarian control over teaching him Japanese language arts during elementary school. It was a regime built on terror and anxiety.
Literal terror.
The father enforced strict reading and writing drills. He would demand that the young author orally explain the precise meaning of complex words or deliver comprehensive book reports before the author had even finished reading the text.
Which is impossible for a kid.
Right. And if the child hesitated for a second, the father would scream at him, demanding, "What do you have a mouth for?"
The amygdala hijack is real there. The father was essentially putting his son into a constant fight or flight state. You cannot process complex linguistic information when your brain thinks it's being hunted by a predator.
Exactly. And it culminated in that deeply humiliating incident with the sake cap.
Oh, that broke my heart.
The sake cap incident is a perfect encapsulation of destructive pedagogy. The young author had written a personal journal entry about collecting sake bottle caps, which was a popular playground game among kids at the time.
Just normal kid stuff.
Right. But his father read the private journal, didn't understand the cultural context of the game, and instead of asking about it, he wrote a glaring red pen comment mimicking his son's voice in a highly sarcastic, condescending tone.
Something like, "You don't know about sake cap collecting, do you? It's interesting."
Yes. A parent mocking a child's authentic voice. The author explicitly notes that he remembers this profound humiliation 60 years later.
60 years.
The psychological result was absolute. The father's strict, punishing, anxiety-inducing method caused the author to utterly despise Japanese reading and writing for years. He associated the subject entirely with trauma and inadequacy.
It killed the joy at the root. But then you contrast that horror story with how his mother taught him.
His mother was responsible for teaching him mathematics and handwriting, and her approach was the polar opposite. She didn't use fear or scolding.
What did she do instead?
She instinctively utilized dopamine-driven learning. She turned education into fun, low-stakes, competitive games.
Games? Like what?
For math, they would literally race each other to complete multiplication tables. She modeled beautiful handwriting not as a rigid, punishable rule, but as an expressive, joyful art form to be emulated.
Because he associated math with play, with the thrill of competition and the dopamine hit of victory, he ended up excelling at it. His brain craved the engagement.
The takeaway for our listener is foundational. If your current approach to studying English feels anything like the father's method, if it is rigid, punishing, driven by anxiety, and results in you screaming at yourself internally and wallowing in self-loathing, it will fail.
It's biologically unsustainable.
Completely. You must completely redesign your study environment to mirror the mother's method. It must be game-like, it must be low pressure, and it must be tethered to something you genuinely enjoy.
You have to find your own Beatles. If you love Taylor Swift, dissect her lyrics. If you're into gaming, change the UI and audio of your favorite RPG to English. If you watch makeup tutorials on YouTube, watch the international creators.
Turn the language into the medium of your play.
Right. Don't sit in a silent room staring at a grammar textbook while mentally berating yourself.
However, I will say, play only remains play as long as you can actually participate in the game. The moment you stop understanding the rules, play mutates into frustration.
And frustration is the ultimate killer of consistency. If you're constantly hitting an intellectual wall, the dopamine stops, the anxiety spikes, and the habit dies.
Which brings us to the mechanics of actual comprehension. Because the author gives us a brilliant blueprint for dismantling frustration, drawn from his own experiences volunteering as a teacher later in life.
He discusses volunteering to tutor a junior high school girl who had completely lost her confidence in English.
Yes. She was staring down the barrel of complex grammar rules and feeling entirely overwhelmed. A traditional father method teacher would simply hand her a chart and say, "Memorize these irregular verbs, it's just the rule."
Which doesn't help at all.
But the author took a cognitive approach. He demystified the architecture of the language.
He gives the specific example of the rule where a word ending in you changes to I's to make a plural noun or a third-person singular verb. Instead of demanding blind memorization, he showed her the structural why.
I loved this part. He had her look at a word like play or boy compared to a word like study or lady. He pointed out the phonetic mechanics.
Right, because in play, there is a vowel and A before the Y. Your jaw is already open. It's physically easy to just add the size sound, plays.
But in study, there is a consonant AD before the Y. There is physical friction in the mouth. You need a vowel bridge to make the transition to the plural sound. Hence, the Y transforms into the A structure. He gave her the underlying logic of the spelling.
He applied the same architectural logic to the parts of speech. He didn't just define nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. He mapped them out visually.
He demonstrated that once you understand the specific job a word performs, constructing an English sentence is no longer a magical, terrifying act. It is simply assembling a logical puzzle.
He provided a structural framework so she could generate her own understanding. And in his essays, he connects this teaching philosophy to some heavy educational theory. He brings up CLIL content and language integrated learning, and a concept called ZPD.
Yes, ZPD stands for the Zone of Proximal Development. It's a foundational theory by the psychologist Lev Vygotsky.
Okay, lay that out for us.
The core idea is determining the space between what a learner can do without help and what they can achieve with guidance. The author pairs this with the pedagogical concept of scaffolding, or ashibazukuri in Japanese. To learn a new, complex concept, you cannot leap directly into the void. You must build a temporary scaffold to support your weight while the new structure is built.
And crucially, he argues that this scaffold must be built in a language you already deeply comprehend.
This is a huge point. He is aggressively pushing back against the modern language learning trend that insists you must only learn English in English. No Japanese translations allowed in the classroom.
The immersion-only rule.
Exactly. He argues passionately that this absolute immersion-only rule is detrimental for beginners grappling with complex, abstract grammar. It creates cognitive overload and unnecessary panic.
If a student is struggling to understand the concept of a relative pronoun, trying to explain that abstract grammatical function using vocabulary the student also barely understands is basically an exercise in futility.
It is highly effective and necessary to use the native language to deeply anchor the concept first. Build the scaffold in Japanese. Grasp the logical why. Once the cognitive architecture is understood, then you practice executing it in English.
The ultimate proof of knowing the why is the story he tells about acing a junior high English test regarding the months of the year. This is such a great example of deep comprehension versus surface memorization.
It perfectly illustrates his point. The students were given a test question where they had to unscramble a set of English words to form a coherent sentence.
What was the sentence?
The target sentence was, "The months after them are mistakes."
Most students would look at that and freeze. Mistakes? What does that mean in the context of a calendar? But the author was the only student in the entire grade to score perfectly on that section. Why? Because he didn't just memorize the spelling of October or December. He had built a scaffold of historical context. He knew the actual etymology and history of the Roman calendar.
Let's walk through the logic exactly as his brain processed it. He knew the original Roman calendar consisted of only 10 months. The prefixes of the later months are numerical.
Right. Octo means 8, like an octopus with 8 legs.
And Decem means 10, like a decade. So historically, October was the 8th month and December was the 10th month.
But the math doesn't work on our current calendar. October is the 10th month. December is the 12th.
Exactly. The author knew the history of why the math broke. He knew that Roman emperors Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar inserted their own eponymous months, July and August, into the middle of the calendar.
By jamming 2 new months into the summer, they pushed all the subsequent months back by 2 slots.
So October, the 8th month, was physically shoved into the 10th slot.
Yes. Because he possessed this deep historical and mathematical understanding, the scrambled English words suddenly possessed a clear, logical gravity. The months after them are mistakes. The English sentence wasn't just a random collection of vocabulary. It was expressing a profound historical truth that he already understood in his native language.
The vocabulary just snapped into place around the concept.
Consistency in learning doesn't come from forcing yourself to stare at flashcards until your eyes bleed. It comes from the dopamine rush of those small cascading aha moments of genuine comprehension. When you understand the hidden machinery underneath the language, it becomes deeply satisfying to operate.
So the direct advice for our listener: when you hit a wall in your English textbook, don't just stare at the page, get frustrated, and start hating yourself.
Stop. Step back. Build a scaffold. Go online and read an in-depth explanation of the grammar rule in Japanese. Figure out the historical or logical why. Once the concept clicks in your native language, the frustration evaporates and your consistency can resume.
But this all sounds flawless on paper, right?
Yeah, let's tackle the reality of the human experience and the biggest hurdle our listener explicitly named: the self-loathing, Jiko Kano.
It's a heavy thing to carry.
She gets intensely angry at herself when the system breaks down, and she fails to stick to her routines. Our author has a surprisingly nuanced, almost paradoxical view on routine, enduring pain, and the absolute necessity of forgiving oneself.
To untangle his philosophy, we have to look back at his most extreme, borderline masochistic routine, the foot massage.
Right. We mentioned this at the very beginning of the show. Every single night, without fail, for 40 years, this man has massaged the soles of his feet with a pointed plastic stick.
And he notes with brutal honesty that for the entire first year of this habit, he would find hard, crystallized lumps in his fascia and crush them with the stick, causing him what he describes as tears of intense pain.
It sounds horrifying. So the obvious question for our listener is, should she be gritting her teeth and enduring tears of pain to build her English habit? Is that the secret?
Because that sounds an awful lot like a fast track right back to the father's terrifying, anxiety-inducing teaching method.
Exactly.
It is a vital distinction to make. We must separate physical, productive challenge from mental, destructive pain. The author endured the physical agony of the foot massage because he was receiving a direct, measurable physical payoff.
He had a reason.
He was suffering from chronic, debilitating fatigue. The massage, painful as it was, stimulated blood flow and nervous system responses that lifted his fatigue, drastically improved his digestion, and normalized his sleep patterns. It was a productive pain that yielded immediate, undeniable relief the following day. The pain was the price of a cure.
Okay, so it was pain with a distinct biological purpose.
Precisely.
Oh.
However, mental self-loathing, the act of psychologically beating yourself up because you skipped a day of studying or didn't run, is a purely destructive pain.
It serves absolutely no physiological or psychological purpose other than to drain your cognitive energy and associate the desired habit with shame.
The author actually mounts a heavy critique against modern hustle culture, which thrives on this kind of guilt. He explicitly calls out a YouTube video he watched that aggressively claimed people who act immediately live twice as long.
The lifetimes 2 theory. This toxic productivity mindset that says if you never procrastinate, if you perfectly optimize every second of your day, you effectively double your lifespan.
And he vehemently rejects it. He argues that taking time to intentionally do nothing or deliberately delaying tasks to let the mind wander is not a sin, it is a necessary luxury.
We are biological organisms, not machines engineered for endless linear efficiency.
He posits that failing to meet your own arbitrary productivity goals should never be a source of life-shortening stress or guilt.
He learned the consequences of ignoring his biological limits the hard way, through a deeply unpleasant physical system crash.
Oh, the roast pork story.
He shares a highly relatable story in the essays. His wife had prepared a massive, delicious roast pork. Driven by pure appetite and ignoring all pacing, he ate it for 3 consecutive meals, consuming it far too rapidly.
The result was severe food poisoning and incapacitating diarrhea. His system completely shut down.
It's a funny, gross story, but the philosophical takeaway is profound.
The lesson he extracted wasn't merely chew your food more slowly. He realized that ignoring limits, whether it's the digestive limit of consuming heavy meat, or the cognitive limit of studying complex grammar, or the physical limit of running too far, inevitably results in a catastrophic crash.
When he was incapacitated with food poisoning, he actually had to rely on an AI chatbot to advise him on exactly how many milliliters of sports drink he could sip per hour just to stay out of the emergency room.
He learned that when you hit your limit, you do not push through. You stop. You listen to the system. So how do we apply this systemic empathy to our listener's self-loathing when she misses a day of her English studies or skips her jog?
The author suggests a specific psychological protocol for when you fail to meet your goal. First, you must admit that the goal you set was likely too difficult for your current capacity. He uses a fantastic Japanese word, hiraki naoru.
What does that mean in this context?
It essentially means to become defiant, but he frames it in a healthy, therapeutic way. It means defiantly resetting your expectations without an ounce of shame. You look at the failure and say, yep, I failed. The plan was flawed.
You drop the emotional baggage.
Yes. Second, once the shame is removed, you have an honest, analytical dialogue with yourself about why the failure occurred. Shame makes us hide from the failure. Analysis helps us learn from it.
Were you genuinely biologically exhausted? Was the specific grammar chapter 2 intimidating, requiring a scaffold you hadn't built yet? Did you try to run before the sun came up when you were naturally a night owl? Exactly. So a missed day of studying is just a data point. It's a missed day. It doesn't mean you were lazy and doesn't mean you are a failure.
Forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a mechanical prerequisite for long-term consistency. If you miss a day, analyze the friction, adjust the difficulty, dial down a notch, and start again tomorrow without the heavy, suffocating backpack of guilt.
This has been an incredible journey through these essays.
We have essentially reverse engineered a custom blueprint for our listener to completely crush her goals and leave the self-loathing in the dust. Let's do a final recap of the operating system we've built today.
Step 1. Hack the decision point. Recognize the limits of morning willpower. Do not wake up and ask your brain whether you should run or study. Automate the initiation. Step outside the door or sit at the desk and open the book. Wait until the system is engaged at the 2-minute mark to make the decision about how far to go. And remember that the final 5 meters is a cognitive illusion.
Step 2. Find your emotional anchor and completely blur the line between work and play. Discard the father's method of rigid, terrifying, anxiety-driven study. Embrace the mother's method. Find your emotional avatar, who you want to become. Find your Beatles, and turn the language into a rhythm game.
Step 3. Build a scaffold to prevent frustration. When you inevitably hit a wall, do not try to force your way through it. Use the deep comprehension of your native language to understand the structural and historical why behind the rules. Comprehension is the fuel that keeps the habit engine running.
And step 4. Eradicate the self-loathing. You are not a machine. Doing nothing sometimes is a luxury. If you miss a day, embrace Irakanaru, defiantly reset your expectations, forgive yourself immediately, and analyze the data to build a better system for tomorrow.
It is an incredibly humane, biologically sustainable approach to mastering any skill.
It really is. And I want to speak directly to our listener one more time. You absolutely can beat a 60-something man's 5-minute morning jog. The physical victory is completely within your grasp. But the real profound victory we want for you isn't about beating his time. It's about internalizing his philosophy. It's about finding your own rhythm, discovering the joy of the process, and finally letting go of the guilt that's been holding you back.
Which brings us to one final, incredibly powerful psychological concept to leave you with, inspired by the author's essay on the peak end rule.
I love this concept. It completely changes how you structure your time.
The peak end rule is a psychological heuristic identified by the Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. It states that human beings do not remember an experience as a general average of every moment. Instead, our brains heavily weight the memory based on two specific points: the most intense moment of the experience, the peak, and how the experience ultimately concluded, the end.
So if we apply this to studying English,
If you force yourself to spend 20 agonizing minutes staring at a textbook, feeling completely lost, and you end the session by slamming the book shut, sighing heavily, and calling yourself stupid, your brain registers the entire experience as a threat. The end was misery. Your brain will actively resist letting you open that book tomorrow.
but if you alter the ending,
If you spend just 5 minutes struggling, but you end the session the exact moment you successfully translate one single beautiful line of your favorite song, or the moment a complex grammar rule finally clicks, your brain registers the entire session as a massive victory. The peak and the end were flooded with dopamine. You will wake up tomorrow unconsciously craving that feeling again.
you control the memory by controlling the exit. So to our listener who wrote in dealing with that heavy self-loathing, the ultimate question to ask yourself as you build this new system is this: what small, undeniable victory will you choose to end your day with today?
Engineer a good ending, and tomorrow takes care of itself.
Dig the trench, let the water flow, and always end on a high note. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.